We met through a mutual friend at an engagement party. The whole event was one of those cozy fall backyard setups, string lights, folding chairs, someone's cousin playing guitar by a fire pit. I didn't really want to go. I was fresh off a long work week and planned to just show up, say hi, and duck out early. But then I saw her. Rachel was talking to someone near the drink table, laughing like she owned the space around her, like her energy just pulled people in. She had this way of looking right at you when you spoke, like what you were saying actually mattered. We ended up standing around the fire for the rest of the night, talking about random stuff, old movies, favorite sandwiches, the fact that neither of us liked big weddings. I remember walking to my car that night thinking, I could marry someone like that. Turns out, I did. We started seeing each other not long after. It wasn't some whirlwind thing. It built slowly, comfortably. She had her own place back then, a little studio apartment above a bakery. I'd come over with takeout, and we'd spend hours watching documentaries or debating whether soup counts as a meal or a side. We got each other. We didn't have to fill the space between us with noise. After about a year, we moved in together. We rented a small duplex on the edge of town while we saved up, and eventually, we bought a house, a 2-story with a little yard and just enough space to feel like ours. I handle property maintenance for a local management company, so I did most of the repair work and landscaping myself. Rachel works in event coordination, so our schedules didn't always line up, but we made it work. That was one of our things, figuring it out together. Our life was filled with small routines that made it feel grounded. Friday night tacos. Sunday morning coffee on the porch. Lazy midweek dinners where we sat in sweatpants and watched quiz shows like an old couple. We weren't flashy. We didn't post much. But there was a real comfort to what we had. She had her circle of friends, and I had mine, but our favorite nights were always the quiet ones at home. It felt real. Solid. We didn't have kids, something we agreed on early. Neither of us had a strong pull toward parenthood, and it never felt like a gap in our lives. Instead, we traveled a little when we could, saved for home projects, spoiled our dog like he was royalty, and talked about maybe buying a camper someday to take road trips across the country. We were a team. At least, that's what it felt like. Back then, I would have told you with full confidence that I knew who I married, that we'd built something good, something lasting. That's where this story begins. One of the things I appreciated most about our relationship early on was how easily we slipped into each other's rhythms. We didn't try to outdo each other or force big moments. We just clicked into place like pieces that had been waiting to find each other. We both liked our independence, but we liked our togetherness even more. Mornings were always my time. I'd be up before the sun most days, part habit, part work necessity. Rachel, on the other hand, was a slow riser. She liked to stay cocooned in bed for as long as possible, especially on weekends. Sometimes I'd make coffee and leave it on the nightstand while she was still half asleep. Other times she'd wander into the kitchen wrapped in a blanket, hair everywhere, mumbling something about needing 5 more minutes. We used to laugh about how she could be so sharp and commanding at work, but basically nonverbal until caffeine kicked in. We had a little chalkboard in the kitchen that we used for reminders, groceries, appointments, birthdays, but over time, it turned into more of a message board. I'd leave her dumb puns or little inside jokes, and she'd respond with drawings or notes like, "Don't forget to buy more hot sauce, you animal." It was silly, but it felt like us. Even when we were busy and barely crossing paths for a day or two, that board made us feel like we were still connected. Weekends were hit or miss, depending on her event schedule. Some Saturdays, she'd be out the door by 8 a.m. to oversee a wedding setup or coordinate a corporate dinner. Other weekends, we had the whole day to ourselves. When we did, we'd often take a drive with no real destination. She loved little antique stores, roadside diners, odd museums, places you'd never find unless you were looking for absolutely nothing. I didn't care much about the destinations, but I loved being in the car with her, watching her pick music, watching her laugh when something weird caught her eye. She made the ordinary feel alive. We hosted friends from time to time, low-key get-togethers with good food and loud stories. Rachel had a way of making everyone feel welcome without trying. People were drawn to her. I used to love watching her work a room, not in a performative way, but in the way some people just know how to be. She made people feel seen. I think that's what I admired most about her. She had presence. And when things were quiet, it was good too. We didn't need constant entertainment. We could sit in the same room doing our own thing, me tinkering with something in the garage or reading on the porch, her curled up with her tablet or planning her next event. Every now and then she'd just call out, "Hey, "You alive out there?" And I'd shout back, "Just barely," and that was enough. We weren't perfect, but we were steady. There was never any grand drama. We didn't have screaming matches or big emotional declarations. We just had a rhythm, a shared orbit. I thought we were building something lasting, something that would deepen over time. And in a lot of ways, we were. Or so I believed. If there was one word I would have used to describe our life together, it would have been settled. Not in the boring sense, like we'd given up or stopped trying, but in the way that we had roots. We weren't chasing anything or performing for the world. We'd found our rhythm and leaned into it. Rachel loved the kitchen. She wasn't a gourmet cook or anything, but she had a flair for plating things like she was auditioning for a food blog. She used to joke that she didn't care how something tasted as long as it looked like it belonged in a magazine. Honestly, most of it did taste good, especially her pasta dishes and this one caramelized onion tart she made every fall. It became a kind of tradition. She'd play jazz or some random indie playlist while cooking, a glass of wine in one hand and a wooden spoon in the other, swaying like she was dancing with herself. I'd sit at the counter and just watch. We didn't even need to talk, just her humming, me watching, the smell of garlic in the air. That was enough. I handled most of the chores. Yard work, bills, home maintenance. Stuff she didn't care for, and I didn't mind doing. I liked the sense of control it gave me, mowing the lawn in perfect stripes, fixing the leak under the sink without calling anyone. We were a team, and we never really kept score. That's what worked. She did things her way, I did things mine, and we overlapped just enough to feel connected. Holidays were quieter than most couples we knew. We didn't travel much. Both of our families were nearby, but we kept visits short and drama-free. We preferred to create our own rituals, homemade brunch on Christmas morning, pumpkin carving contest in October, matching pajama jokes on New Year's Eve. I still have pictures of us, faces messy with flour, sitting on the kitchen floor with our dog between us, laughing over a collapsed attempt at soufflé. I keep coming back to that night in my head lately. I must have looked at that photo a dozen times without knowing what was coming. I think it's easy to assume you'll see the cracks when they start forming. That things will shift in a noticeable way, arguments, awkward silences, miscommunication. But for us, nothing ever felt broken. Even our quietest nights still had this hum to them. I thought that was love, knowing someone so well that silence isn't distance, just comfort. Rachel would sometimes surprise me with small things, my favorite chocolate left on my desk, a new screwdriver set I'd mentioned offhand, a playlist she made for my long drives between jobs. They weren't extravagant gestures, but they felt like love in motion. Like she was paying attention. And I guess that's what made it all so hard to see. There was no storm brewing. No warning signs. Just the kind of calm that makes you think you're safe. Things didn't fall apart all at once. They never do. At least, not in real life. Looking back, it started with little things, quiet, unremarkable moments that didn't feel like much at the time. But that's how distance works. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It drifts in quietly and makes itself at home. The first time I really felt it was on a Thursday night. Rachel had just gotten home from what she said was a client meeting that ran long. Nothing out of the ordinary, she'd been late plenty of times before. But this time, she was distracted. Not exhausted, not stressed, just somewhere else. She kissed me hello like always, but it felt more like habit than affection. I didn't push. I figured maybe the day had been rough. But it kept happening. Over the next couple of weeks, there were more of those moments. Her phone, which used to live face up on the counter or nightstand, started showing up face down. She never used to care about it. She'd leave it in the other room for hours. Now it was always nearby, screen locked tight, thumb hovering a little too quickly when a message came in. I told myself I was being paranoid. Everyone's entitled to privacy, right? She worked in events. Late-night texts and odd hours were part of the deal. Still, it felt different. She also started dressing up more. Not in a dramatic way, just subtle upgrades. A new pair of heels I hadn't seen before. Lipstick on a day she claimed to be working from home. I noticed she started carrying perfume in her purse, too, which was new. I asked once, joking, "Who are you getting all dressed up for?" And she rolled her eyes and said, "It's called being presentable." Maybe it was. Maybe I was overthinking. But her tone had a sharp edge I hadn't heard in a long time. Then there were the nights she'd come home and go straight to the shower without saying much. Normally, she'd kick off her shoes, complain about traffic, or raid the fridge before even thinking about getting changed. Now it was in the door, quick hello, straight to the bathroom. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, But something about that shift made my stomach turn. It felt rehearsed. I started noticing how often she was busy. Weekends used to be ours, maybe not every minute, but we always carved out time to do something together, even if it was just grocery shopping or binging a show. Lately, she always had somewhere to be. A bridal tasting, vendor walkthrough, last-minute rehearsal dinner meeting. She was in demand, sure, but it was like she didn't even try to keep our time sacred anymore. And through it all, there was this one constant. She never seemed present. I'd ask how her day was, and she'd give me a vague fine, then change the subject. She used to tell me funny stories about difficult clients or absurd requests. Once she had to source 100 lavender-scented candles for a corporate dinner because someone thought it would balance the energy. Now, nothing. It was like the details didn't matter anymore. Like I didn't need to know. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to come off as controlling or paranoid. And to be honest, I wasn't even sure what I was feeling. Doubt? Disconnection? Insecurity? All I knew was that something in the air between us had shifted. There wasn't a fight. There wasn't even tension in the traditional sense. But I could feel her slipping, like she was already gone, just waiting for the right moment to let me know. I've always believed that relationships don't fall apart in explosions. They fade out quietly, and most of the time, one person sees it happening long before the other admits it's real. That was me. I didn't have hard evidence. I didn't have answers. What I had was a feeling in my gut that things weren't right, and the longer I ignored it, the heavier it sat there. Rachel had always had a busy calendar. That wasn't new. What changed was how completely she stopped letting me into that world. I used to know where she was, who she was meeting with, how her day went. Even if it was just a passing, ugh, this client again. Lately, when I asked, she'd give vague answers. Just meetings. The usual. Sometimes she'd smile like she found it cute that I was curious, but that smile didn't feel warm anymore. It felt like she was humoring me. We used to talk before bed almost every night. Just little things. A recap of the day, a dumb meme we saw, what we wanted to do that weekend. But now she'd turn in earlier or later, always off schedule from me. If I was brushing my teeth, she was already under the covers scrolling through her phone. If I got into bed first, she'd say she had emails to finish and stay up another hour in the living room. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and realize she still wasn't beside me. One night, I walked into the kitchen around midnight, half asleep, and found her standing there with a glass of wine, just staring at her phone. She jumped a little when she saw me, said she couldn't sleep and was just answering a text from a coworker about a last-minute event. I nodded, got some water, and went back to bed. But I remember watching her as I turned down the hallway. Her shoulders were stiff, her phone held tightly in both hands like she was waiting for something that wasn't meant for me. I didn't snoop. I didn't dig. I didn't even ask questions, not directly. I still trusted her. Or maybe I just wanted to. I wanted to believe this was just a phase. Stress. Burnout. Something explainable. The next week, she started going to yoga again. That had been her thing years ago, but she'd stopped during the pandemic and never really picked it back up. Suddenly, she was going 3 nights a week. Said she wanted to get her routine back. I thought it was great at first, until I noticed she always got back later than she should have. Like a 6:30 p.m. class would get her home close to 9. I asked once if she wanted to go together sometime, just to try it out, and she laughed. You'd hate it, she said. Besides, I need it to be my thing. Which was fine. I get that. But there was something about the way she said it that stung a little. Like I wasn't welcome in that part of her life anymore. Another time, I suggested we go out to dinner. Just the two of us. We hadn't done that in a while. She hesitated. Said she was tired. Ended up ordering takeout and spending most of the night on her phone while we ate in front of the TV. I tried not to read into it, but the silence between us felt heavier than usual. And then there was a random Saturday morning when I noticed something strange. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was still in the shower. I glanced at it, just instinct, and saw a name I didn't recognize. No message preview, just a name. Aaron. I paused, but only for a second. I didn't open it. I didn't ask, but that name sat with me all day. She hadn't mentioned anyone new at work, and I couldn't remember the last time she talked about anyone named Aaron. I didn't do anything about it. I went out, ran errands, fixed the front gate like I'd planned. But the whole time, that name kept circling in my head. I kept telling myself, don't make assumptions. Don't go crazy. But something was happening, and I was beginning to wonder just how far away she drifted. The hardest part wasn't the silence. It was how familiar everything still looked on the outside. The same house, same coffee mugs, same grocery list on the fridge. It was like living inside a photograph, everything in place, but frozen. No movement, no warmth. Just a still frame of what used to be. Rachel was still Rachel. She still kissed me goodbye before she left the house. Still remembered to pick up my favorite granola. Still sent the occasional, love you text in the middle of the day. But there was a hollowness behind it all. Like the words were automatic. Like someone had taken over her body and was going through the motions while her mind was elsewhere. I tried to shake it. I told myself I was being dramatic. People go through rough patches. Emotional slumps. Maybe she was just overwhelmed with work. Maybe it was seasonal. Or hormonal. Or a dozen other explanations I gave myself at 3 in the morning when I'd roll over and find the other half of the bed still cold. She'd started locking her phone. That had never been a thing before. We'd never shared passcodes, but we didn't need to. We had nothing to hide. But now? I'd see her check messages and swipe the screen away so fast it was like she was putting out a fire. And if I walked into the room while she was texting, I'd get this brief flash of guilt on her face before she'd brighten up and say something mundane like, "Did you feed the dog?" She'd also started going for long drives on Sundays. Said she needed headspace. I respected that. Everyone needs their own time, but it started to feel like I was being written out of her life, little by little. She never invited me. Never told me where she went. Just left in the late morning and came back by dinner, acting like nothing had happened. I asked her once, gently, where she'd gone. She shrugged and said, "Just driving." I stopped by the lake for a bit. I smiled and said, "Next time, maybe I'll come with." She didn't even pause before replying, "It's kind of my thing right now." Then she turned her attention back to her laptop, and the conversation died. That was the thing, conversations didn't end anymore. They just died mid-air. The more I tried to hold on to what we had, the more it felt like gripping smoke. I'd look at her from across the dinner table, still the same person in every physical way, same laugh, same eyes, same way she tucked her legs under herself on the couch, and yet she felt gone. Like whatever part of her used to reach for me had turned its back and closed the door. One night, I found myself staring at our wedding photo on the bookshelf. I don't even remember walking over to it. I was just suddenly standing there, glass of water in hand, looking at a version of us that felt like a story I made up. She looked so happy in that picture. We both did. I tried to imagine how that woman became the one who now slipped away from me one day at a time. I still didn't think she was cheating. Not consciously, anyway. I didn't have any proof, and I didn't want to be that guy who invents problems where there aren't any. But I knew something had changed. Something I couldn't name. Something I wasn't ready to say out loud yet. I didn't make the decision lightly. In fact, it took me weeks to even admit I was thinking about it. I'd never done anything like that before. Never so much as opened her email or scrolled through her messages when her phone was left on the couch. That's not the kind of relationship we had, or at least, not the kind I thought we did. But something inside me had shifted. It wasn't anger, not really. It was this low, constant ache of not knowing. I was living with someone who was moving through our life like an actress in a role she no longer believed in, and I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see it. Her absences, her distance, the way she slipped out of our bed like it wasn't hers anymore. Every day it got harder to breathe in the space between us. I didn't want to accuse her. I didn't want to corner her or make a scene or ask questions I wasn't ready to hear the answers to. What I wanted, what I needed, was the truth, even if it was quiet and ugly and sitting in the dark when I wasn't home. So, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I installed cameras. I work in property maintenance, so I know my way around tech setups. I didn't go overboard, just 2 small devices. One facing the hallway, the other angled toward the bedroom. Not obvious. Not invasive. Just enough to tell me if anyone else was walking through our front door when I wasn't there. I justified it to myself by saying I had a right to know what was happening in my own home. And I meant that. But the truth is, I also felt like I was losing my grip. I needed something to hold on to, something to cut through the fog of doubt that had been slowly choking me for weeks. I told her I had to update the Wi-Fi and do some work on the router. She barely glanced up from her phone. "Cool," she said, scrolling. "Do what you need to do." She didn't ask questions. She didn't even pretend to care. That stung more than I expected. I tested the cameras the next day. They were motion-activated, saving short clips to a cloud folder. I figured I'd leave them running while I was out doing inspections or at the office. I wasn't even sure what I expected to see. Maybe her coming home and just being alone. Maybe I'd realize I was wrong. Maybe I wanted to be wrong. For the first few days, nothing happened. She came home, fed the dog, showered, scrolled through her phone on the couch, sometimes made herself dinner. All routine. All normal. But even in those clips, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. She moved differently when I wasn't there. Looser. Lighter. Almost like she was living more freely without me in the house. And then, one afternoon, I saw something that made my chest tighten. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, staring at her phone like she was waiting. Then she stood up, walked out of frame, and didn't come back for nearly an hour. The footage resumed with her re-entering the room, hair slightly damp, shirt wrinkled like she'd changed quickly. She looked flushed, almost nervous. That night, she curled up beside me like nothing had happened. Told me she was tired from a long vendor meeting. Kissed me on the cheek. Rolled over and fell asleep. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, my heart a mess of questions. Nothing had been caught. Not yet. But the door was cracked. And I couldn't pretend it wasn't anymore. It was a Thursday afternoon when it happened. I was out on a job, checking on a water heater replacement, when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the hallway camera. Nothing unusual, Rachel had the day off, and she mentioned maybe doing some cleaning or catching up on emails. I glanced at the preview, saw her walk through the front door, and didn't think twice. Until I saw who walked in behind her. He was about my height, dark hair, wearing a gray hoodie. I froze. Not because I recognized him right away, but because Rachel turned to him in the doorway, smiled that smile, and wrapped her arms around his neck like she'd been waiting for him all day. I stood there in that client's laundry room, phone in hand, watching the screen like it was a scene from a movie. But it wasn't fiction. It was my hallway. My house. I pulled up the second camera feed. The one in the bedroom. They didn't take long. Less than a minute after walking in, they were in our room, laughing softly, kissing, her shirt already half off. She was playful with him, more affectionate than I'd seen her be with me in months. Like whatever tension she'd been carrying in our marriage vanished the second he touched her. Then I saw his face. Clear, just for a second. Aaron. The name I'd seen on her phone weeks ago. The one she never mentioned, never explained. I didn't watch the whole clip. I couldn't. I closed the app, locked my phone, and stood there in silence. My ears were ringing, my breath shallow. Everything around me, the clanking tools, the low hum of the water heater, the light filtering through the small window, suddenly felt foreign. Distant. Like the world had shifted 6 inches to the left, and no one noticed but me. There wasn't anger at first. Just stillness. Numbness. The kind of shock that doesn't even hurt yet. It just suspends you midair while the ground drops out from under you. I left the job early. Didn't even tell the client. I drove around for a while with no real direction, just my hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary and my thoughts unraveling behind my eyes. Part of me still wanted to believe there was some explanation, some version of the truth that made sense. But the footage didn't lie. She brought him into our home, into our bedroom, like I didn't exist. And the way she moved around him, familiar, casual, affectionate, it didn't look new. It didn't look like a one-time mistake. It looked like something that had been happening for a while. I sat in my truck for nearly an hour that evening, parked just down the street from the house, watching the porch light flick on as the sun went down. I knew she was inside, probably showered, probably curled up on the couch with her favorite blanket, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. I didn't go in. Not that night. I needed time. Not to forgive. No, I already knew I wouldn't. I needed time to think about how I was going to respond. Not with yelling. Not with begging. Not even with confrontation. I wanted her to feel what I had felt. The cold sting of betrayal where love used to be. And I knew exactly how I was going to do it. I didn't sleep the night I saw the video. I didn't even try. I sat in the dark on the living room couch of my brother's apartment, where I'd gone after driving aimlessly for hours. My thoughts weren't racing. They were sharp, clear, too quiet. Like the moments right before a thunderstorm, when the world holds its breath. I watched the sun come up over the rooftops in silence, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. It wasn't about rage. I wasn't going to scream or break things or throw accusations like darts at a wall. No, I wanted her to understand. I wanted her to feel the shock I felt standing in that laundry room with my phone in my hand and her betrayal playing out on a screen. I wanted her to lose the ground under her feet like I had. And not just because of what she did, but because of how she did it. The lies. The distance. The ease with which she let me believe everything was fine while she invited another man into our bed. So I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in months, her sister, Leah. Let me be clear, I didn't go into this looking to hurt Leah. I didn't manipulate her or pretend it was about reconnecting. I told her the truth. I told her Rachel had been cheating on me, that I had proof, that I wasn't looking for pity. I just needed someone who could understand what betrayal like this felt like. And yes, I admit it, someone she'd never expect to be part of what came next. Leah was hesitant at first, confused. But I showed her the video. I watched her face go pale, her jaw tighten. She said she'd suspected something was off with Rachel for a while, but never imagined it was this. She asked me what I wanted. I said I didn't know, not exactly, but I wanted to remind Rachel that actions have consequences. Real ones. I won't go into graphic details. That's not the point of this story. What I will say is this. What happened between Leah and me wasn't romantic. It wasn't even emotional, not really. It was two people who'd been used and sidelined by someone they thought they could trust. It was deliberate. It was sobering. And yes, it was filmed by mutual agreement. Not out of some twisted fantasy, but to make a point. Rachel had invited someone into my space, into our bed, and treated me like I was an afterthought. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to respond. The next morning, I sent her the video. I didn't add a message. No angry text. No explanation. Just the file. It took less than a minute for her to start calling. I let the phone ring. Then it rang again. Again. Dozens of calls, messages pouring in. What is this? What the hell is wrong with you? We need to talk. She shifted from confusion to panic to fury in the span of 30 minutes. By the time she got home that evening, I was already waiting. Calm. Distant. Ready. She walked through the front door, looking like a woman caught between fury and fear. You're sick, she spat, holding up her phone. You seriously sent that to me? I stood in the center of the living room. The same place where she once curled up with me on Sunday mornings. The same place I had watched slowly turn hollow over the past months. You started this, I said simply. I just made sure you understood what it feels like to be betrayed by someone who says they love you. She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't give her the chance. Pack your things, I said. You're not staying here tonight. Or ever again. She stared at me, stunned. You don't get to decide that. I already did. I walked to the bedroom, grabbed the bags I had packed for her, everything she'd left around the house since the last time she saw Aaron, and tossed them toward the front door. Then I walked back through the hallway, opened the window above the porch, and threw the rest of her things out one by one. Clothes, shoes, makeup, her phone charger. She screamed at me to stop, but I didn't. I just kept going. This is insane, she yelled. No, I said calm. What's insane is thinking I'd stay with someone who used me like a background character in her real life. She started sobbing, saying it wasn't like that I didn't understand, that we could talk it through. But it was too late. My silence wasn't cold, it was absolute. I walked past her, opened the front door, and held it open. She didn't move. Leave, I said. She did. The next morning, I filed to have the car transferred fully into my name. It was a gift, but with my bonus last year. The title had only ever been under me, but I let her drive it because I thought we were sharing a life. Not anymore. I changed the locks, called her employer, and had her emergency contact info updated. I blocked her on everything. I was done. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt a strange sort of peace. Not because it didn't hurt, it did, but because I had finally chosen myself. The first few days after she left were the strangest. The house was quiet, still, almost too clean. No spare pair of heels by the door. No hair ties on the bathroom sink. No scent of her shampoo lingering in the hallway. I kept catching myself expecting to hear her footsteps overhead or see a notification light up on my phone. But there was nothing. Just the dull hum of silence and the slow recognition that I was truly alone now. And yet, it didn't feel like a loss. Not in the way I thought it would. It felt like stepping out of a fog I hadn't realized I was living in. Like all the noise, the uncertainty, the tight feeling in my chest, gone. What replaced it wasn't happiness, not yet, but something quieter, clarity. I could move through the house without second-guessing what mood I'd come home to. I could breathe. I started putting things back together one small step at a time. Not out of revenge, and not to make some big statement, just because I needed to feel like this space belonged to me again. I rearranged the bedroom, donated anything we'd bought together that made my stomach twist when I looked at it. I bought a new bedspread. Different color, different texture. A reset. I spent more time with my brother and a couple close friends, people who didn't ask for the full story unless I offered it. We grilled in the backyard, went to a few baseball games, talked about everything except what had happened. I needed that. Not to process, but to feel normal again. Then, one Saturday, I met someone. It was at a local bookstore cafe I hadn't been to in years. I was looking for something to read, something not about relationships, self-help, or starting over, and ended up bumping into a woman while turning a corner too fast. Literally bumped her elbow, almost knocked a latte out of her hand. We both apologized at the same time. Her name was Evelyn. She was easy to talk to. No forced charm, no overcompensating small talk. She had a quiet way of speaking, like she didn't feel the need to rush her words. We ended up talking about books, then travel, then somehow childhood dogs. It was one of those conversations that just flows. Not intense, not flirtatious. Just natural. I didn't tell her much about what I'd been through, not then. I wasn't ready. But when she asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Not because I was desperate to move on, but because for the first time, it didn't feel impossible to picture someone else sitting across from me at a table, laughing at something I'd said. Evelyn and I started slow. Coffee turned into a walk. A walk turned into lunch. Weeks passed. She never pushed, never asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. And maybe that's why I found myself wanting to tell her things anyway. With her, there was no performance. No guessing. I didn't feel like I had to earn her attention or compete with a memory I couldn't see. One night, we sat on a park bench watching the sky go dark, and she said something that stuck with me. People always talk about what they lose when things fall apart. They forget to talk about what they find. And she was right. I didn't just lose Rachel. I found myself again. My voice. My peace. The version of me that wasn't constantly bracing for the next disappointment. I'm not rushing into anything with Evelyn. That's not what this is about. But it's the first time in a long time I've looked at the road ahead and thought, maybe something good is waiting at the end of it. And for now, that's more than enough. I've replayed it all more times than I care to admit. Not because I'm stuck there, but because when something breaks that close to your chest, your mind circles it like a bruise, you keep checking to see if it still hurts. And it does, in a way. Not like it did at the beginning. The sharp edges have dulled. The betrayal no longer wakes me up in the middle of the night. But every now and then, when I hear a certain song or pass by a particular street or glance at an old photo buried in a drawer, there's still a flicker of that hollow feeling in my chest. I think that's the cost of loving someone with your whole heart. They leave footprints behind, even when they're gone. But here's the thing. I'm okay. Not perfect. Not moved on in some dramatic, clean-cut way. But okay. Steady. Quietly rebuilding a life that's mine again. I've learned a lot over the past year, most of it the hard way. I've learned how silence can say more than words ever will. How betrayal doesn't always come with shouting and slammed doors. Sometimes it walks in wearing a familiar smile. I've learned that closure doesn't come from confrontation or revenge, but from accepting what you can't change and deciding not to carry it with you any longer. Rachel reached out once more, months after everything ended. A single text, "I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Whatever we had died long before I watched her cross that line. What remained after was not mine to fix. Her sister, Leah, and I haven't stayed in touch. What happened between us wasn't meant to last. We were both hurting, and we gave each other a strange kind of comfort in the middle of something neither of us asked for. I don't regret it, but I don't cling to it, either. As for Evelyn, we still talk. Still see each other. It's slow, real, uncomplicated in a way I forgot relationships could be. We're not making promises we can't keep. We're just showing up, one day at a time, with honesty and kindness. That's more than I've had in years. Maybe more than I ever had. Some mornings I sit on the porch with my coffee and think about how close I came to staying in something that was quietly destroying me. I think about how long I ignored my instincts just to preserve a version of life I wanted to be true. And I'm proud, not for how I handled it perfectly, I didn't, but for how I chose to walk away. For choosing to heal instead of hold on. If anyone reading this is in that in-between space, where nothing is proven but everything feels off, trust yourself. You don't need permission to notice when love has stopped being love. You don't need proof to know when something's already gone. Sometimes, walking away isn't giving up. It's choosing yourself. And that's the best decision I've ever made.